Hello everyone, welcome to the new React development tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll talk about React, Redux, and Redux Toolkit. This is a very important tutorial. Please listen carefully, and if it's needed, watch more than one time. What do we learn in this tutorial? We'll talk about how we store data in React, how to install Redux, and how to add Redux extension to Chrome, how we use this extension, and then how we use Redux Toolkit, and then use Redux to store the form data. So as I said, this is a very important tutorial. Please listen. Okay, here's the final product after this tutorial we will learn to create. It's not a very beautiful UI, but that's okay because we want to keep it as simple as possible. So this is coming from the previous tutorials that we had. This is kind of like a to-do item, and we can just add some item to it. For example, wash the dishes, and all it does, it adds the item to the list. So the next item would be go home. So it keeps adding the items here. Turn off the lights. So as soon as I add the item, it will add it here, and then we can see it in the Redux Toolkit, Redux tab that we will talk later. And that's all we're going to develop for this tutorial. Let's see how we create it. Why do we need Redux in our application? Okay, the standard way of storing data in React is via Redux. There are other ways to do it, but the standard way for industry is Redux, and we are going to do it with this Redux Toolkit and also React-Redux. The way that we install it, we go to their documentation. If we can see here, reactredux.js.org, and you can go to getting started. And if you go to the getting started, it will show you how to install it from scratch. But since we have some existing app, the to-do app that we created in previous tutorials, if you have not watched it, I suggest to go and watch them. And since we have the app, so we can use this command npm install React Redux. And if I go to the directory of my project and do npm install React Redux, it will definitely add it to the package.json that we have here. And see, it refreshes, and yes, React Redux here. And then the next step, if you see the documentation, we have the app.jsx, and we have to wrap it with this provider. So we import the provider from the library that we just created or installed, and then we wrap it with the provider. And we have the store that we will talk about this later, but just for now, we copy paste whatever we have here inside of the app.js. So this is the source directory of our application. When you open it, you'll see the index.tsx, and that's the file that has it here as a reference. So we have strict mode around it, but we need to wrap it with the provider. Sorry, first we need to import it. Maybe after this part. Yeah, we import the provider. Now we need to wrap it with the provider. So let's go wrap it with provider, and we can just close this provider tag and use the indentation. There's a store that we need to create this file manually, and the way that we import it here, it says that we get the store. And I will create that store file shortly. It should be inside of this is just preference. I'll prefer to add a folder and call it Redux, and add all of the Redux related stuff into it. And I want to put the store inside of this file, and the way that they do it is just store, and it will be. So let's first create that file. We can just create a TypeScript file and call it store. So it adds it. We don't want to add it here, so we can come over here and say Redux, and we have a store file. So now it knows where to add it. It complains here because we have not exported anything from this file. The file is completely empty, but that's okay. We will add later some code. But that's all about installing the store React Redux and how we provide the store for the application. So basically, it provides the store throughout the whole application. That's what it does. The next thing that we need to do is React-Redux Toolkit, and the documentation is here, redux.js org, and the installation is basically kind of like the same way that we did for React Redux, but this time we need Redux Toolkit, and we do npm install redux/toolkit. Let's do that. Again, it's in the main directory, and it will install it in our package.json again, and then later we can, via this file, we can create the store file. So as you can see, it added this under the dependency. So let me a little bit zooming so you can see these dependencies better. So yeah, Redux Toolkit, and it adds React. Okay, the next thing that we need to do is to fill out this store file. Currently this store file is an empty file. So how do we fill it out? If we go back to the documentation here inside of this Redux.js, and you go to this section, why Redux Toolkit is how to use Redux today. So you will see this sample store file. So we'll copy paste the whole thing, and we'll remove the items that we don't need it. So we paste it here, semicolon. I will remove these items, and that's all. That's all we need to start the scratch for the store. So all it does is configure the store, and we'll add some reducers. We'll talk about reducers. Don't confuse with the name and what does this reducer mean. Just know that in order to start the store, we need this configuration, and we will add our stuff inside of this reducer. But for now, it's an empty. So if we go back to index.tx, it is still complaining because it doesn't have a default export value. We can just do default here and remove this one, or if you want, we can do something else. If you don't want to change anything that we copy paste from the documentation, which is not an issue, so you can just export the store and put it back here. So that's all you need to do for your application. But usually it's better to have a default value for your store. So I prefer to do default, and it will return the default value for our application. So we don't have any error here. Okay, now the next thing that we need to do is, what do we gonna store? Of course, it's to-do items, but how do we store it? We need to let this reducer know what is needed and what do we try to store here. So again, go back to documentation. You saw that we removed these two files. Currently, seems like this example, they're trying to implement two reducers, two things to keep track of. But for our application, we need to only track only one of them. So I'll just import this one and this file. So let's go back here, and if I add this, so to do reducer, so it will be the property that we will later access to get our to-do items, and we can just simply import it like this. So we currently don't have this file. We can just right click here and then create a new file and add this to-do slice. I'll talk about what is inside of this to-do slice. So currently it's an empty file, but for now this file is done. So this store file, we are done with it. Later on, if we want to add any other capabilities for our to-do list, we can just add it here. But for now, for this tutorial, this will be it. When we want to access the store, this will be the to-do. And now let's fill out this to-do slice. What do we do here? Again, if we go back to the documentation, we will find the boilerplate for it, and this is the file. I'll remove the stuff that we don't need later, but for now, again, the documentation is right here, Redux.js, and you can just go there and go back to this file. This section, why Redux Toolkit, is how to use Redux today, and it explained we had it before. It was like the implementation was a little bit more coding, but recently they defined Redux Toolkit, and it reduced the number of lines of code that we had. For example, before you had to define the actions, reducers, give it a type, but all of them are gone and you don't have to worry about it. Right now it's very simple, and you just define the reducers and the actions are automatically created for you. So going back to this to-do slice, I'll paste it here. Let me zoom in a little bit, and I will go over one by one. And what is it? What is this slice? So we talked about the store here, and we said that in order to access this to-do, we need to define it here. Then in the slice, it's basically a slice of this to-do is this store needs a name. So in order to access this store, you need to have a name for it. So that's the place that you define a name. So basically for this create slice, there are some configuration and options that you pass in, and some functions you pass in. For our store, we need a name. That's necessary. So this to-do list needs an initial value. So for our to-do, when you start the application, it should start from an empty array because we don't have any to-do. Somebody should add this to-do to the items. And then we have some reducers. What are these reducers? These are the functions that you can add, for example, to-dos in your array of to-do items. So we need this function, but we don't need this function because our application doesn't have that capability. I just remove it for the simplicity of this tutorial. And all it does, it adds the item inside of this array that we initially defined. So for the sake of simplicity, I don't want to add any of these items like ID or if the to-do is completed or not. I just need the text. So for example, this to-do is, for example, wash the dishes. That's all I need to save, and that's all I need to push to this array. And that's all for this slice. If you see that it's complaining here, it's because of TypeScript, and it's complaining about the type. As I mentioned, it's not the best practice to give it a type any, but for the sake of simplicity, our application, and focusing only on the main purpose of this application, which is Redux, we just give it any. So the type is any, but it's better to give it an actual type. Anyway, so that's all we need to do for the reducers. Now we can use this function to access and add the items inside of the array. So let's do that. One step away from our application to make it working. The only piece that it's remaining to be added is using this function, which is the action to actually add the to-do item inside of our list. And where do we do it? Inside of the view that we created. So where was the view? If you remember from the previous tutorial, we created this form which look like this. It has label, it has input, and it has a submit button. And at that time we just did console log. We can just remove these console logs here, and we can just add our actual code, which was adding an action to add the to-do items. So how do we do that? So we can use the React-Redux stuff that we just learned. So there are useful stuff there. So let's import it first. You know that by now that whatever we need to use from other libraries, we have to import it. The way that we import it is very simple, React-Redux. So what do we import? There are two useful methods, use dispatch and use selector, as it's suggested here. use dispatch and use selector. Why do we need it? So we need to use selector. I'll define a constant variable here, and we need this to do. So basically we get all of the to-dos from this use selector. So how do we use it? It basically call a function and it gets all of the state, and as you can see, this is how you can state, state dot to-dos. And yeah, and it's complaining because we have to pass the state, and the type, as I mentioned earlier multiple times, is any. So that's all we need to do to get all of the to-dos items. We basically using this function to get it from the Redux. And where do we use dispatch? So we use dispatch here by defining another variable. Say const dispatch. Why do we need dispatch? It's for dispatching the event or action. So whenever we need to dispatch an action, we use this dispatch. So we define it first, and where do we dispatch it? Inside of the handle click. Remember, at that time it was just console log and send the current value of the input field. So we do more useful things right now. We just dispatch, and what do we dispatch? We call our function, the function that we have here to do added. Oh, I had to zoom in a little bit so you get to see it better. So yeah, we dispatch, and we say we can import this file first. And the way that we import it, we are trying to import this to-do slice here. So say import, and the function that we had over there was to do added, so it knows. So that's good. I usually use single quotes for import, but that's fine here. And here we dispatch this to do. And what do we do to dispatch? We basically dispatch the text. And where do we get the text? Input field dot text. So that's all we need to handle the submit action. So let's try and see. I went ahead and tried to test the application. I saw that it's not adding anything to the view, and it's because we never used this to-dos. So we need to add it inside of the view somewhere. So it's better. So we had the form. Remember, this is the tag for the form. So we can put our to-do items outside of this form, and the way that we can just implement it, we can say to-dos. Now there's a function called map that it maps around all of the items that we have for this to-do list, and it will take a function, and we can just return anything that we have. So it returns all of our to-do items, and we can just simply use ul li an unordered list. So we wrap the whole map with this unordered list, and then inside of it we can just say it should return li, and what is inside of it? It's to do, I think it's that text, if I'm not wrong. We can just simply test it, but yeah, that's all we need to add. So let's go back and test this, and yeah, you just saw that by adding that, it will add automatically to the view. So that's all for the application. This console warning, I usually pay attention to the warnings and errors. Errors, yeah, we should take care of it, but warnings also take care of them. And it's about the key, unique key for each element. And since we're using the map here, it's saying that each element of this map should have a key, unique key. So in order to do that and resolve this issue, we can just simply add a key, and the value will be the index of this. This is kind of like a numerator, and the type of this index is number. So we can just add this key value to the li element, and the next time you render this application, you will not see any warning anymore. So that's to resolve this issue. So the next thing that we need to learn is about the debugging tool for Redux. So it's very easy to download. You can just go and search for Redux Chrome extension, and so you'll see it easily here. Yeah, that's Redux Dev Tool. I already have it, so it's already installed, but you can install it. And then once you install it, you will see this tab on your developer tool. So if I go to this tab, there's stuff that are very important. The first thing that you'll notice is the one to-dos that we defined in our application. Basically, this to-do is this one. This is the one that you see here. So if I add something else here, right below this, you will see it in this list. And then you'll see the value under this to-dos item. So basically this is, initially it started with the empty array, and then once we add it with this function, it will add items inside of it, and it stored the items that we already have on the view, so you can see it here. And on the left hand side, you will see the actions that it takes. For example, you see we have only, for this tutorial, we have only one action, but if you have different actions, you could see it on the left hand side. Currently we're just dispatching only to do added, which is this function. So this is the way that you can debug your application, and I'll not go through all of the details, but for now it's very important to know this is a debugging tool for Redux that you can monitor the value of your store, and you can see the actions. So if I refresh the page, so it starts from the scratch and empty string, empty array. But if I add something, as soon as I add, it dispatches the event and it adds the item to the array. So that's all for this tutorial. We will add more complex stuff throughout our application. We will create more complex application. And for now, we're going step by step. Stay tuned and like, subscribe, share as much as you can, because we're going to have a lot of cool stuff. Have a great day.